This is Left Voices for Tuesday, March 18th, 2014. I'm Andrea Sears. Tonight,
if they can't guarantee that the waste isolation pilot plant is a safe facility, then perhaps that pilot study should be ended.
A radiation leak has halted operations at a nuclear waste storage facility. Shortly before midnight on Friday, August 14th, radiation was detected at the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant, a storage facility for nuclear waste carved out of salt deposits 2,000 feet below Carlsbad, New Mexico. Known as the WIPP, the underground network of tunnels and vaults is designed to be the final resting place for waste from the nation's nuclear weapons program. The Savannah River site in South Carolina alone has shipped some 12,000 cubic meters of transuranic waste across the country to the facility. On February 26, 13 workers were told they had tested positive for exposure to radioactive material. On March 9th, it was announced that 4 more workers had tested positive. At this time, the source of the radiation is still unknown. The facility has stopped accepting waste, and officials estimate it will be 2 to 3 weeks before workers in protective gear will enter the storage areas to investigate what caused the release. The Waste Isolation Pilot Project has been touted as a model for future long-term geological storage of radioactive waste, including commercial waste from nuclear power plants. Keven Kamps, radioactive waste specialist at Beyond Nuclear, says this is the first radiological contamination at WIPP since it opened in 1999. But considering the nature of the waste stored there, the exposure of 17 workers, all of them above ground when the radiation was detected, is extremely serious.
The wastes buried at WIPP are things like plutonium. So inhaling plutonium is a very dangerous thing, can lead to lung cancer. There's also been plutonium and americium detected a half-mile away from the WIPP site downwind. So it's a serious incident. It comes right after an underground fire at the site, which happened earlier in the month of February. And reports just coming out now have said that the reason for the fire with the salt-moving vehicle was simply not maintaining the vehicle. And the Department of Energy is trying to disassociate the two incidents, saying that the vehicle fire has nothing to do with the radiological release.
Now, the release apparently happened in the currently active storage vault, the cavern that they've carved out in the salt to hold radioactive waste. So this is the one where they are currently storing waste. What kind of waste goes into this?
This is transuranic waste from the nuclear weapons complex. So that means elements on the periodic table greater than uranium, mostly plutonium. It's coming from places like Rocky Flats, Colorado, where the plutonium triggers for nuclear weapons were manufactured. Los Alamos, and another indication of the seriousness of this is Los Alamos is now trying to find ways to deal with its waste, its plutonium-contaminated wastes. And some other facilities that send to WIPP would include Idaho National Lab as well as Hanford in Washington.
And what does this waste consist of? I understand it's tools, equipment, rags. How is this waste generated?
Well, it's been generated since really the 1940s, the nuclear weapons complex. So any materials that have come into contact with plutonium and americium and become contaminated. And so what they do is they put them into 55-gallon drums, which are then loaded into transportation overpacks that are then sent down to WIPP. And I said that there hadn't been a radiological incident at WIPP previously, but there was a near miss several years ago when one of these transports was involved in a vehicle accident. And one of these 55-gallon drums inside of the overpack came loose, released airborne plutonium. And actually the WIPP facility sent the shipment back to Idaho, so really a 1,000-mile journey back to the point of origin, simply so that they would not contaminate the surface facility at WIPP by opening the transportation overpack. But because of this latest incident, they now have contamination on the surface at WIPP.
What does this mean for the storage of nuclear waste? I know that Los Alamos, for example, is under state court order to dispose of its nuclear waste because it's stored in above-ground barrels right now that were threatened by a wildfire a couple of years ago. So there's extreme danger there.
Exactly. That's the thing about radioactive waste is it's such a dilemma because at places like Los Alamos or Hanford or Idaho National Lab, it's quite a dilemma to have plutonium-contaminated wastes just laying about. We see the same thing on the nuclear power side of the coin, where the high-level radioactive waste generated back in the 1950s in some cases is still stored at the point of generation. And the risks are immense. The risks of high-level radioactive waste storage pool fires, or even with the outdoor dry cast storage, there's a lot of momentum to try to get this stuff moving. But the question is, where would it move to? And another impact of this WIPP incident is that WIPP was being looked at as a parking lot dump for commercial high-level radioactive waste. And if they were ever able to centralize those wastes there, then the temptation would be very great to bury it underground. And in fact, there were just news articles just before this radiation release pushing that. In fact, in the New York Times, there was an article saying that there are those who think that WIPP would be a great site to bury commercial waste. So one would hope that this radiological release would put an end to that, but the booster club at WIPP is quite strong. And in fact, they're standing by their position. They say they support WIPP and they are not concerned about this latest incident.
There's also been some talk since this leak was detected among Republicans in South Carolina, where the Savannah River site is located, about restarting or re-examining Yucca Mountain as a possible waste site. Is this a real alternative?
Well, the good news is that the Obama administration has canceled the Yucca Mountain dump site proposal, and that was for commercial high-level radioactive waste. And for good reason. It's an earthquake zone. It's a volcanic zone. There's a lot of water under the surface. So if waste is ever buried at Yucca Mountain, Nevada, it's going to release that radioactivity at a massive scale into the environment. It'll be a nuclear sacrifice area. So there are Republicans in both the House and the Senate who have not given up on the Yucca Mountain dump. But the White House is strong at this point. Certainly the Senate Majority Leader, Harry Reid from Nevada, is adamantly opposed to that happening. So in a sense, we are back to the year 1957. We do not know what to do with our high-level radioactive waste in this country.
And what's the impact of that on the licensing of nuclear power plants? I understand that that's been put on hold basically because the NRC cannot find a place to store the waste.
It was a tremendous court victory by grassroots environmental groups as well as a coalition of states, including the state of New York, who challenged the Nuclear Regulatory Commission on this Orwellian policy called nuclear waste confidence. We call it the nuke waste con game. It dates back, ironically enough, to the year 1984, where the NRC said to the nuclear industry, we have confidence that this waste can be disposed of safely and stored safely in the meantime, so go ahead and make as much as you want. And the courts just ruled in 2012 that that is not okay, that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has to carry out an environmental impact statement. That's currently underway. There were nationwide public comment meetings, and we generated thousands of comments that went into the NRC. And they are racing through this process, hoping to conclude it by October to allow reactors to get license extensions again, like Indian Point Units 2 and 3 near New York City, and even to license new reactors in places like Michigan. And it's all contingent on resolving this waste issue, and I think there's further legal battles to come.
Well, meanwhile, at the waste isolation pilot plant, they are now saying that it'll be 2 or 3 weeks before they feel safe sending workers back down into these salt caverns. What do you see as the future right now for that facility?
Well, they certainly need to take tremendous precautions because even a microscopic amount of plutonium in the lung can cause lung cancer. As I said, this incident really should put an end to any talk of burying high-level radioactive waste from the commercial industry in there. In fact, the NRC itself has admitted that the heat coming off of irradiated nuclear fuel could damage the excavated caverns in a salt formation and simply collapse them during operations, which would be a danger, of course, to workers, would also be a danger of a huge radioactivity release. another reason to not rush into moving wastes to a place like WIPP is if it is just a temporary surface facility, it's just a huge waste. It'll have to go back somewhere else, perhaps to where it came from in the first place. And we kind of saw that with that transport incident to WIPP several years ago, where it made it all the way down from Idaho just to be sent back. So it doubles the transportation risks all along the way. In terms of the plutonium-contaminated nuclear weapons waste, if they can't guarantee that the waste isolation pilot plant is a safe facility, then perhaps that pilot study should be ended.
And would that involve removal of the waste that's been stored there to date?
I haven't heard any such talk yet, but in Germany they are facing just that dilemma at a facility called ASSE. It's spelled A-S-S-E. And of course, the German nuclear establishment said it was completely safe. It is a salt formation, and it's turned out not to be. In fact, there's a real risk of major releases, and the German nuclear establishment is now trying to figure out how to get the radioactive wastes out of this salt formation.
Keven Kamps is the radioactive waste specialist at Beyond Nuclear. This has been Left Voices for Tuesday, March 18th, 2014. Join us again tomorrow for more news and information from a progressive perspective. I'm Andrea Sears for leftvoices.net.